Hey class, it's Mr. Creighton. So this is part of your first project. This is the first line design. So the organic line design, and organic meaning curving. So none of the lines will be straight. They all have a curve to them. And so you might be looking at this and like, man, there is a lot going on. But I'm gonna break down why this design works and why it is successful. So on your objective sheet that says Intro to Drawing and Line Designs, you can find that digital file. So that has 3 objectives. The objectives are what you must do for your design to be successful. So for it to be a polished and finished design. So our first objective is to create a thoughtful line design with clean and sharp lines. Clean and sharp meaning if you look at these lines, you can clearly tell where the edge of the line is. It's very sharp and very like tight. So that's the key. What you don't want are really sketchy lines to the point where I can't tell where the line ends and where the line starts. Also, if you look at this design, the lines are filled in. So in between the line, there's space, and those are all filled in. So line being an art element, so what we use to make art, this first product will use that art element meaning lines. The second objective is to use contrast in the design so there's something to focus on, aka a focal point. So for those of you who are anime fans, this is actually Goku from Dragon Ball Z, and then the big key flame behind him. So this is our focal point. This is what we're focusing on. So the key though, in order for us to have something to focus on, we need contrast. And contrast means the difference. So in this case, it's the difference between dark and light. So you can easily see this focal point here. If you look at this design, the same exact thing. So you can see the pumpkin easily and the vine easily because they're so dark. And the way God designed your eyes are a lens, like a camera, and your eyes pick out the things that are different amongst everything else. And that's how you can tell where things are, of course. But like this, you can clearly tell where this is, this dark pumpkin compared to the lines in the background that are much lighter, with lighter grays and white. And so that creates the focus, aka the focal point. So your design must have a focal point that we can see because of contrast. If you lose that contrast, that's where we have an issue. So you can make a really cool design. This is a cool design, but it's a little bit hard to tell what's going on. And the reason why is because it lacks contrast. So you have to look really close. You might see something here. So it looks almost kind of like a beast. So some type of creature, could be like a lion, bear, something along those lines. You can see like the mouth, the nose, almost looks like fur. And then also, if you look closely on this side, you can see a head, body, and then a hand. But the problem being is this is all really bold. It's really dark. And there's no way for your eye, or nowhere for your eye to rest. So what I mean by rest is this is so dark and so bold, your eye's gonna find that and kind of sit in this area. And this is more important. So you want to make sure our eye sees that. You want to make sure that's bold and attracts our vision, and that's the goal. So the third objective is to use balance. Balance meaning we use the majority of the space. So if you look at this over here, so this entire design, not only do we have a focal point, the entire space is filled. So edge to edge, so left to right, and then top to bottom, that is filled with lines. And then also you want to make sure this design appears to be finished. So using the space makes it appear to be finished, but also filling in the space in between the lines. So look at this design. In between each line, you have this kind of like gray, lightly colored gray area. Well, that breaks up the white, so it's a little bit easier for your eye to kind of settle on this, so that way the contrast isn't crazy high, but it does make it appear to be a little bit more polished, a little bit more balanced, and a little bit more finished. And so that's how we're going to do that. But then also going back to the idea that you want to use clean and sharp lines, if you shade these areas in, and your lines get super fuzzy, just outline them. That's perfectly fine. And also make sure that when you fill this area in, that you fill it in pretty cleanly. If you make it super sketchy, it appears to be kind of like rushed and unfinished and less sharp. So we want to make sure we have that. So for your organic curvy line design, make sure that you use black for the focal point, and then white and gray for the background. Make sure you have curved lines that fill the entire sheet of paper edge to edge. Make sure you have a clear focal point that's filled in dark so it stands out. And then also make sure that the lines have some gray to break up the white space. What you can't do is turn in a design that appears to be unfinished. Like that. That is unfinished. It's not balanced. We have these gigantic gaps. You can't have those. And we don't have a clear focal point. So same thing. Cool design. This is actually Batman. That's the Joker. But you have all these giant gaps, and you can't have that. We want to make sure we have a balanced design. We want to make sure that we use bold, black in between the spaces so our eye sees that design right away. We don't want the giant white gaps. So an unsuccessful design has a lack of contrast, lack of a focal point, and it's not clear. So going back to that original thing. So that Goku one we saw before, you might be thinking, Mr. Craydon, that looks complicated. I don't know how to get to that point. Well, that's what I'm going to break down first. So before you even start the real project, so that first design, what we got to focus on doing is creating a sketch. And a sketch is part of the creative process. And what I mean by creative process, it means the idea of planning for the real project. It's hard to create something successful without a plan to get you ready. So what we do is you think about what you want to do. So for me, actually my first name is Jason. My last name is Craydon, and you'd of course call me Mr. Craydon. But I'm going to create a design that uses my initials. For your design, it can be literally anything you want to do. So it can be your initials. It can be like a symbol or logo you like. It can just be shapes, as long as you have a clear focus. So when you create your sketch, it's important you build around that focus. So what I'm going to do is, you know what? I want my sketch. So my design will be, this is kind of creating a simple plan. My design is a J and a C. So then what you'll do from there, so that's just what I'm going to roll with. I'm going to have you guys make a small rectangle that represents the space of your design. So that rectangle can be horizontal, so longer than it's tall, or vertical as well. I'm going to make my design horizontal. So you can just make a small rectangle, because this is just a sketch. A sketch just means it's a plan, and then you are going to create your plan, set up your plan so you have something to work from. So the key when you create a design, well, the focal point's the most important part, so you want to build around that focal point. So I'm going to start by making a J, and again, remember, this design must curve. I'm also going to make a C. So that's my focus. And again, you don't have to make your focal point in the middle. Your focal point can be wherever you want, as long as it's large enough for us to see it. That's the most important part. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to build around this focal point. So remember, your lines must curve. Every single line must curve. So I'm going to go around this thing. And that's one way to kind of get this started. You can just go around it. To kind of give you a starting point. What you're going to notice is now, by going around it, I'm kind of losing that J and the C, and that's okay. So the key, though, is that that J and the C is the most important piece of your design. So one way to make sure that still stands out is you can make curved lines, but they don't need to go with that design. They can go against it. They can go, just a different way overall. So if I make curved lines like this, that's going to make sure that design stands out because they're different. So remember, the way your eye is designed, the way God created us, is that your eye is looking for things that are different, the things that stand out, the things that you should see. So if I make lines that go the opposite way, that's going to help my main focal point stand out because it's not like the focal point. And that's one of the major keys for here. What you also want to do is make sure your lines are as tight as possible. So after you create your design, you evaluate it. And what I mean by evaluate it is you look to see if it looks complete. Do I have any gaps? Do I have any areas that are not very tight or filled in? So if I look at my design, I can point out a couple. One at the top, so I can plug that up. One here on the right, I can plug that up. One on the left, one at the bottom, and also this gigantic space inside of the O. So I can fill that area in until it feels a lot tighter. So that is my design. And if this was the real thing, we are going to fill in that major focal point dark. So if I take my pencil, and for the sketch, this doesn't need to be super clean, by the way. It's just a sketch. But set up the part you want to be really bold and dark for sure. So in my design, I'm gonna make this area a really bold black shape. So inside of my line, so it's super easy to see. Even if you look at the sketch, you can clearly see that J and the C very easily. What I think I'm gonna do is just to make sure our eye still stays in the section, I'm just gonna fill this area in really dark too. Because that's gonna draw the person's eye into that area. And again, for the sketch, you can make this pretty loose. You don't have to make the dark areas you're filling in super tight, but for the real thing, yes, it needs to be very, very tight and very, very clean. So even if you make it sketchy, for the real thing, go back over it and fill that in. That needs to happen. It needs to be as tight and as clean as possible. So look at this. You can easily see that J and the C. You can easily see the outline. And then in my real design, I would just fill the rest in gray or white. So I can fill this in gray very, very lightly. I can skip a couple. I can fill that in gray very, very lightly. So something like that is what would happen in the real design. So you can clearly tell how this feels a little bit darker than that stuff around there. And that's the key. So once you have that sketch, what you will do is you will send that sketch to either me, Mr. Creighton, or your other intro to drawing teacher, Mrs. Tennis. So you'll send it to one of us. We will approve that sketch. And as soon as that sketch is approved, you can start the real project. So in your sketchbook is where you would start the real project. So flip to another page. You can either set this up vertically, so taller than it is wide, or horizontally, of course, longer than it is tall. So either way. And then you want to create your focal point first. So like in that Batman design I showed you, I would draw Batman, I would draw the outline, I would draw the Joker, and then I would start going around this design and then also going inside of that design to fill it until all the line work is done. Once all the line work is done, then start filling in your spaces. So for the light spaces, a lot of you guys use a regular pencil, so just a number 2 pencil is what you'll use. For the dark spaces, you're gonna use this. So this pencil is called an ebony pencil, and that's what you'll use for the really dark spaces. What that will allow for you to do is it will allow for you to make that focal point really dark and really bold so it stands out. And the more it stands out, the better is the key for your design. And there's one last thing you need to know. That last thing you need to know is when it's time for you to work on your actual design, you need to make sure that your spacing is not way too wide. So if your spacing gets super wide, you could lose points. Remember I talked about this design and how not effective it is? There's gigantic gaps, and that's what you don't want. So what you will do is you will check your spacing. Your spacing will be about 1/4 of an inch. If you do not have a ruler at home, because I realize that may happen, we don't all have rulers, then look at this sheet. This sheet was sent home. It says describing lines. So what this represents is the types of line designs you'll make. So you'll make a organic curvy line design, but then you'll also make a design that uses straight types of lines. So these three, and that's the second one. But what it also shows you is the spacing you'll use. So if you look at this here, the spacing here on the far right, this is roughly about 1/4 of an inch. So the space in between these two lines, same thing with these sections. Keep your spacing in between your lines roughly about this space. So it's about 1/4 of an inch. If you get much larger, that's how you could lose points, because you are not balanced out the space and the gaps are too big. You can go smaller than this, but you can't go much wider. Also, what this sheet represents is why adding a dark area in between the lines is so important. So this has more weight. So if you look at the space in between the lines, this has more weight, it's more bold, it stands out more, and that's more important because your eye would see this section over here before it sees this section over here, and that part's important to remember. So, just a reminder, you have to do this first. Plan for what you want to do. So create your sketch. Send a JPEG of that sketch to me, Mr. Creighton, if I'm your teacher, or Mrs. Tennis, if she's your art teacher. Once that sketch is approved, we'll give you points because, again, you must follow the creative process. Think about what you want to do, so plan it. Sketch it out and then evaluate it. So evaluate it before you send it to us. We will evaluate it and critique it, meaning we're going to give you feedback, especially if there's things you need to improve to get it ready. And then from there, you'll create your final design in your sketchbook. So on another page, it can either be horizontal, it can be vertical, your focal point can be whatever you want it to be. So again, if you want it to be initials, symbol, logos, a character, that's fine. The only thing you have to be aware of is if you make a character, kind of like this Goku one, don't worry about details on the inside. You only need the outline or the shape. Another word for that is a silhouette. It's just the outline of what that character or that shape is. That's all you need, and you just fill the rest in with lines, and then you have lines on the outside. So for your design, you must have balance. Use the majority of the space. You must have clean and sharp lines. Make sure it's tight and looks polished. And you also must have a clear focal point using contrast. So as long as you got that stuff, you're good to go and you can get started.